The story of Paul through his letters. Long before these writings were gathered into a single book, they were something far more personal, urgent messages written in real time to real people facing real struggles. These were not carefully polished theological essays meant for scholars, but heartfelt letters sent across dusty Roman roads and open seas to communities trying to hold on to faith in a chaotic world. When read in the order they were written, these letters reveal something powerful, not just doctrine, but a story. The story of a transformed life, a growing movement, and a message that refused to be silenced. A man sits in a rented room in Rome, chained to a Roman soldier. He picks up a pen, not to write a book or compose formal theology, but to send a letter. He writes to people he knows and loves, people who are confused, divided, struggling, and sometimes drifting. Those letters, written on simple papyrus and carried across the vast Roman Empire, would become the most influential collection of personal correspondence in history. The New Testament attributes 13 letters to the Apostle Paul, written over roughly 15 years from around AD 49 to AD 67, but they are not arranged in chronological order in the Bible. Instead, they are organized by length, from the longest, Romans, to the shortest, Philemon. Reading them that way is like sorting someone's messages by word count instead of by date. You lose the story. But when you read them in the order they were written, everything changes. You begin to see the arc of a life. You watch Paul fight for the gospel when it is still new and fragile. You see him build churches in some of the most morally chaotic cities of the ancient world. You sit with him in prison, feel the sting of betrayal, and stand beside him in his final days as he writes to a young man he loves like a son, asking for a cloak because winter is coming. This is not just theology. This is a life unfolding. The first letter Paul likely wrote is Galatians, and it burns with urgency. This is the same man who once hunted Christians, approved of executions, and tried to destroy the very message he now defends. After a dramatic transformation, Paul travels through Galatia, planting churches and nearly losing his life in the process. Then, troubling news reaches him. Other teachers are telling new believers that faith in Christ is not enough, that they must also follow Jewish laws to be saved. Paul responds immediately. He skips the usual warm greeting and goes straight to the issue, astonished that they are turning to what he calls a different gospel. At the heart of his argument is a defining truth. People are made right with God not by religious performance, but through faith in Jesus Christ. He points back to Abraham, long before the law existed, to show that righteousness has always been based on belief, not ritual. The law, he explains, served as a guide pointing towards Christ, but now that Christ has come, that role is fulfilled. Then he makes a radical declaration. In Christ, the divisions that once defined people, ethnicity, status, gender, no longer determine their standing before God. Galatians draws a clear line, grace or performance, freedom or bondage, and Paul does not compromise. From Galatia, the story moves to Thessalonica. After only a few weeks of teaching, Paul is forced to flee, leaving behind a group of brand new believers. Concerned for them, he later writes 1 Thessalonians. This letter is warm and deeply personal. Paul speaks not just as a teacher, but as someone who genuinely loves these people. They are struggling with a painful question. What happens to those who die before Christ returns? Paul reassures them that the dead are not forgotten. They will be raised first. This is not abstract theology. It is comfort meant for real grief. Soon after, Paul writes a second letter. This time he addresses a different issue. Some believers have stopped working, convinced the end is near. Paul is direct. Faith does not eliminate responsibility. Hope should lead to purpose, not passivity. Next comes Corinth, a wealthy, chaotic city known for its moral excess. The church there quickly begins to fracture. Paul's letters to the Corinthians address division, immorality, pride, and disorder. People are forming factions, lawsuits are happening among believers, serious moral issues are being ignored, and even their gatherings have become divided. Paul addresses each issue directly, but in the middle of correction, he pauses to write something timeless, a powerful description of love. He makes it clear that knowledge, gifts, and even sacrifice mean nothing without love. Without it, everything becomes empty noise. Later, he presents a detailed defense of the resurrection, showing that it is central to the message. Without it, faith collapses. With it, hope stands firm. In his second letter, Paul opens up about his own suffering. Instead of boasting in achievements, he points to his hardships and reveals that true strength is found in weakness. He shares a personal struggle, a thorn he asked God to remove. The answer was not relief, but grace to endure. And that truth has strengthened countless people. Sometimes strength is not found in escape, but in perseverance. Then comes Romans, the most structured and comprehensive of Paul's letters. Writing to a church he did not start, Paul carefully builds his argument from the ground up. He begins with a hard truth. Everyone falls short. No one meets God's standard. Then he presents the solution, justification by grace through faith. He explains what that means, peace with God, freedom from sin's control, and the internal struggle that still exists. Then comes a powerful declaration. There is no condemnation for those in Christ. Nothing can separate them from God's love. He also addresses complex questions about Israel and God's promises, affirming that they remain intact. Finally, he shows what this faith looks like in daily life: transformed thinking, sacrificial living, and choosing good over evil. Romans is not just a letter, it is a foundation. Paul eventually arrives in Rome in chains. Though confined, he continues writing, producing 4 letters known as the prison epistles. Ephesians reveals the grand scope of God's plan, set in motion before the world began. Salvation is by grace through faith, not earned, but given. Yet it leads to a transformed life expressed in relationships and daily living. Paul ends with the image of the armor of God, likely inspired by the soldier beside him, reminding believers to stand firm. Philippians is filled with gratitude and joy, written from prison. Paul encourages believers to rejoice not because life is easy, but because their foundation is secure. He points to Christ's humility as the ultimate example. True greatness is found in serving others. He also clarifies that strength in Christ is about endurance, not achievement, the ability to remain steady in every circumstance. Colossians confronts teachings that suggest Christ is not enough. Paul responds clearly, Christ is supreme. All things were created through him, and in him everything holds together. If you have Christ, you have everything. Nothing more is needed. Philemon is short, but deeply personal. A runaway slave named Onesimus becomes a believer after meeting Paul. Paul sends him back to his master, not as a slave, but as a brother. He even offers to cover any debt. It is a living picture of the gospel, restoration, forgiveness, and transformed relationships. After his release, Paul continues traveling and writes to young leaders. Paul writes to Timothy, guiding him through leadership challenges in a struggling church. He emphasizes integrity, responsibility, and dependence on grace, not perfection, but faithfulness. To Titus, Paul gives practical instruction for organizing churches in a difficult environment. Once again, the foundation is grace, not human effort, but God's mercy. 2 Timothy is Paul's last letter.
This time, he is in a harsh prison, facing death. Many have left him. The tone is urgent and deeply personal. He encourages Timothy to remain faithful, to continue teaching truth regardless of circumstances. Then he reflects on his life, not claiming perfection, but faithfulness. He has fought the good fight. He has finished the race. He has kept the faith. In one final human moment, he asks for his cloak and his books. Soon after, Paul's life comes to an end, but his message does not. 13 letters, written across years of hardship, travel, and imprisonment, continue to speak with clarity and power. Grace over performance, hope over despair, love over division, strength in weakness, Christ above all. Together, they tell a story, not just of theology, but of transformation. A life once driven by opposition became a life fully surrendered, and through these letters, that story continues to speak, clearly, powerfully, and personally, even now. Soon after, Paul's life comes to an end, but his message does not. 13 letters, written across years of hardship, travel, and imprisonment, continue to speak with clarity and power. Grace over performance, hope over despair, love over division, strength in weakness, Christ above all. Together, they tell a story, not just of theology, but of transformation. A life once driven by opposition became a life fully surrendered, and through these letters, that story continues to speak, clearly, powerfully, and personally, even now. But this message is not just meant to be studied, it is meant to be responded to. The same gospel Paul defended, suffered for, and gave his life proclaiming is still calling today. It calls for a decision, not tomorrow, not someday, now. Turn away from anything that is pulling you away from God. Let go of the idea that you can earn your way to Him. You cannot. That is why grace exists. Come as you are, but do not stay as you are. Put your faith in Christ. Trust in what He has already done, not in what you think you must do. Receive the grace that Paul fought so hard to protect. That is where real life begins. And if this message has helped you see these letters and the gospel in a deeper way, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Like this so more people can find it. Subscribe so this message can keep reaching further. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because the same truth that changed Paul's life is still changing lives today, and it might start with the next person who hears it.